This is Beyond the Green Screen, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hi, everyone. Meteorologist Royal Norman. This is Beyond the Green Screen, the First Alert Weather Team's podcast. David Hondula is here. He is from the city of Phoenix. He's the Director of Heat Response and Mitigation, also known as the Heat Guru. Sorry, David. I appreciate you coming. David Hondula, how are you today?
Royal, doing great. Enjoying some cooler weather today as we transition out of what was a really tough summer into winter that for us is a lot of strategic planning, and it's also tree planting season.
Yes, indeed. I have planted a tree already this season, so there you go. Hey, we met a long time ago, and you're one of the first people really, I think, to make me intimately understand the issues with heat in the valley, because before that, we all just basically sat around and said, well, it gets hot in the summer here. Well, it gets hot in the summer there. We know that. Where did your interest in that come from, and why have you decided to sort of pursue that?
Well, Royal, like you, I've always been interested in the weather. Mm-hmm. In fact, in my past, I thought I might have your job one day. I grew up in New Jersey. We had 4 seasons. I remember being out with my parents' VHS camcorder, filming thunderstorms, filming flooding we had in our neighborhood. And took that interest into academic setting, pursued a degree in the equivalent of meteorology at the University of Virginia. I remember doing well on my first test in that undergraduate class, kind of Meteorology 101, and that sold me that was the path for me. As I moved on in studies, I was really interested in severe storms, like I guess every aspiring meteorologist is, and thought I could do something on forecasting when the first lightning strike would occur, which is often the most dangerous. Realized a few months into that process I didn't have a mastery of electricity and magnetism, which turned out to be key parts of the lightning story. So the lightning journey was not for me. And at the time, I was working with a professor there, Bob Davis, who was in this field called biometeorology, how weather and climate impact human health and the health of other organisms. And he had these papers on heat and human health. What's going on here? Like I've never, like you were saying, what's the story here? And learned that heat is one of the most impactful weather hazards for public health in the United States and other countries. And as we peeled off the layers of the onion, so many interesting social dimensions to who's impacted and why, physical dimensions, where is it hot and why. I was hooked and pursued my doctoral studies on heat, and that propelled me into work at ASU, and certainly propelled us into the city role today. But couldn't have imagined it 10 or 20 years ago.
But also, you've really tackled it with a passion. I mean, from the day I met you, you had this passion to try to help people who are getting exposed to excessive heat and trying to make it safer for them.
The public health community, of which I would consider myself a part, says every heat-associated death is preventable, and I've never heard a disclaimer or excuse or reason why that can't be the case. There is a kind of an intellectual mystery and puzzle to solving some of our heat challenges that intrigues me, but also the real need we see in the community. And we know, I'm sure it's true for your viewers and listeners, people have many different types of challenges with heat in the summer, some of which are very severe, very catastrophic, even fatal. But so many of us deal with challenges of our own kind with heat throughout the summer, and there are things we can do to make life a little better in the summer in dealing with our heat. Yeah,
mainly educate ourselves for sure. So before I ask you about last summer, the hottest summer on record for Phoenix, those records go back to 1895. I want to ask, though, about the progression over the last 10 to 15 years. There's a chart. You can look at any chart of heat deaths in Maricopa County, and it is going up and up and up and up. Is it ever going to stop going up?
Well, we sure hope so. I think that's one of the reasons that the city of Phoenix created the Office of Heat Response and Mitigation, the first of its kind anywhere in the country. And it's a striking pattern when we look 2006 to 2014. The numbers ebbed and flowed in the high dozens, maybe 50, 60, 70, then back to 60 the next year. But since 2016, almost every year has been a record setter. And we firmly believe that there are interventions that can be deployed, are being deployed right now, that can save lives, keep people out of the hospital, prevent those 911 calls. But the public health data suggests that we are not collectively, as a city, region, state, country, implementing those quickly enough, not reaching the right people, and they're not resourced at the scale that we need to keep everybody out of harm's way.
Now, is it just because we're quote unquote getting hotter that we're finding more people impacted by the heat, or are there other issues coming into play?
Yeah, I don't think we can dispute the idea that warming is part of the story, but I'm not sure it's a very important part of the story. In some of our previous research, when we looked at the first big jump we had, which was in 2016, in the heat deaths went up considerably in 2016. When we looked at the weather data, there wasn't much reason to believe that 2016 should have been that bad if we just look at the temperatures. From a temperature standpoint, we did some, I won't say sophisticated health modeling, but we put some effort into coming up with some good hindcasts of what it should have been in terms of the public health output. And we couldn't come up with a model just based on temperature that said we should have had a lot of heat-associated deaths that year, which instead pointed us to thinking about social systems and processes. And I didn't really understand this part of the world that well at the time, but there were some headlines that caught our eye in the newspaper about some shelters closing and some resources pulled out of some of our critical social service programs at that time. We developed a working hypothesis that an evolving landscape of social service programs was probably the driver of that jump in 2016, not so much the temperature. I mean, holding everything else equal, place with higher temperatures in the future would be more dangerous, but nothing is ever held equal in the real world.
Right.
Things are always changing. So I think our warming trend has to be a part of the story, but I think we're still learning how much of an important part of the story that is. I think what we are absolutely learning is that everything else that's happening in terms of social service programs, communication, from broadcast meteorologists like yourself and elsewhere, everything else that we're doing is really, really important in shaping those numbers. And for that reason, I believe that we can have a Phoenix of the future that is hotter as we measure it at Sky Harbor Airport, which is one that has many, many fewer or perhaps even zero heat deaths.
Yes. And so, but it's not just the story of homeless people, correct?
There are many different narratives, many different circumstances, many different stories about why people find themselves in harm's way for heat. People experiencing homelessness, absolutely the highest risk group when we think about how many people who are unsheltered are tragically showing up in these heat mortality reports. Think about how many are there and how many people are experiencing homelessness in the community. It's a really, really high relative rate compared to the rest of the population. But as you said, that is not the entirety of this story as well. In fact, we've just been having some conversations with our partners at county and state health departments. Can we do a better job of formalizing what those narratives, those stories, those circumstances are, those profiles, we might call them, profile, a dangerous word here. But if we can really map out what those profiles and circumstances are, then let's talk rigorously about how the interventions map onto those different circumstances. We're concerned about somebody who doesn't have access to shelter at all. We're concerned about a person whose air conditioner goes out. We're concerned about somebody who's exerting themselves in the heat, working or recreating. There are a lot of different circumstances. That's what makes the problem so hard but so interesting, is that we really need to think broadly about what the solutions are and how to implement them.
Because every year, as you say, you hear the different stories, and one of them that we hear that kind of puts a question mark, above your head, and you go, why would that happen, is when somebody's air conditioning goes out and they're unable to seek help or don't know how to seek help, and the heat becomes unbearable. That's a real story, isn't it?
It's a real story, and it's one that feels like in our connected era today, it shouldn't happen. And I want to give a shout out, certainly to all of our media partners, but for this particular one, to the Arizona Republic. They had an excellent story on the title of the story was "The Human Cost of Heat," published 7 or 8 years ago, where they actually wrote the story of 30 people who had died from heat the previous summer. And several of the stories in that reporting were these cases of air conditioning failure. And there are certainly cases where folks might be unable to ask for help or don't realize what's happening. Maybe they're taking medication that changes how their body perceives how hot the environment is. But we also read in those stories about what some family members of the decedents characterized as stubbornness, others characterized as pride. Whatever we call it speaks to the importance of the social dimensions here, the relationships, and recognizing that the same model isn't going to work for everyone. We find it so frustrating. I don't know if it's true for anybody listening now or us in the room. We could feed our pets from our phone. People are quite literally somebody's probably doing that right now,
yes.
Watching or listening to this episode. And yet if if my family member's air conditioner goes out on the other side, I might not know about that until it's too late. That's, I would say, unacceptable in our era of modern technology. And what we need to work with partners, and the right mix of those partners, I think, is an open question. Local government, utilities, other institutions, neighborhood associations. How can we build an ecosystem of awareness there so we can have an intervention? And what resource do we have available to help when that happens?
And it doesn't seem like, because like you say, we can do so much on our phone, that it would be all that expensive to be able to, say, monitor air conditionings in some places. You know,
I would argue the
the
technology is the easy part here. I think the social dimensions, and in some cases the legal and risk management, those become the hard. But the technology's there. There are products on the market. If somebody wanted to go on and buy a temperature sensor to give to their their aunt or uncle who they might be concerned about, they can go on the market, buy that today, and have your phone receive a text message alert. We don't have a program at the city right now that's doing that, but those solutions do exist on the market. And for anyone who's concerned about a neighbor, friend, family member who might be alone in their home and it would get too hot without anybody knowing about it, solutions exist in the market right now, and we would be supportive of folks taking action.
Yeah, take care of them, that's for sure. I want to talk a little bit about mitigation, because if we are going to, well, first of all, let's do the summer. I don't want to skip this past summer. What a nightmare for you. I mean, all those days above 115, all those days where it didn't drop below 90. We never had a summer like that, did we?
You're the expert meteorologist here, so I'll trust your historical perspective. But no, you're right. There are so many different ways that 2023 was a record setter. And I'm not saying it caught us by surprise, but particularly interesting how things played out after a relatively mild June. And it was almost like we were a little too lucky in June, the way it played out, and we had to pay for it, and boy did we.
Yeah, and so the nighttime temperatures, explain that a little bit. That keeps the stress on when those temperatures don't go down. Normally, when I first moved here in the 80s, the temperature almost always in the summer dropped into the 80s. Now it doesn't do that so often.
Yeah, that's what we hear from the public health and the epidemiology community, and what we hear from neighbors and residents. Our systems, whether it's the system of our body or the systems of our city infrastructure, just don't have the opportunity for rest and relief. The body can handle heat. There are people who work in the heat. There are people in the military who experience very extreme conditions. The body can handle that and recover and return to those situations. When we miss that recovery period, I think that's when we see these accumulating public health impacts. The burden add up, and it really did, sadly and tragically and disappointingly, add up for our community this summer.
So the difficult thing about fixing the heat problem, if you want to call it that, heat mitigation in Phoenix, is you can't wave a magic wand and do one thing and it's done. There's lots of things that need to be done. What would be some of the top things that you're thinking of doing and your office wants to do?
Well, I'll acknowledge that we think about the work in two different domains. One, we think about what we call heat response, short-term strategies that are trying to keep people safe in the summer. And I would say the words that come out of your mouth every day in the summer, here's the forecast, here's some precautions you can take, it might be dangerous. That's part of the heat response system that we have. Also efforts like distributing water bottles, letting folks know where cooling centers are, how to get to them. That would all be heat response. Heat mitigation, the other half of our thinking, long-term strategies to cool the city and make it more comfortable, thinking about more shade in outdoor areas as well as conditions inside people's homes. Average person spends about 90% of their time indoors. We need to be sure those indoor environments, as we were talking about before, are safe as well. So what are we thinking about? We'll just pick a couple of examples there. Heat response. We're so happy to see the conversation happening at the county and state level to really strengthen our coordination of heat relief facilities, the cooling centers, the respite centers, the hydration stations. MAG has been an excellent leader and convener of that conversation. But I think as we've seen the need grow, as we've seen the public health impacts rise, we recognize there's need for more professionalization and institutionalization of the work. Where are cooling centers? When are they open? How are they operating? What security needs do we have at these facilities? There's a lot of really important work happening in that space, quite literally at this minute, to ensure that the public cooling resources that are out there are better meeting the needs of the population than they have in the past. Mitigation, I think if we were to walk into a random neighborhood, we might hear about help with energy bills first and foremost on ways to manage the summer. And the city has had a huge role there, not through our office, but especially with the various COVID relief packages. The city has provided literally millions of dollars to help people pay their bills, pay their rent, and so on. So we'd probably hear about energy bills first, but we'd hear about trees second. There's such a demand here in the city of Phoenix and all across the Southwest for more shade in neighborhoods, particularly in neighborhoods that have very, very little shade today. And we are delighted that the city of Phoenix committed some of its American Rescue Plan Act funding to support more tree planting and shade structures in underserved communities. We're delighted about that. And we are ecstatic that the federal government recently made a $10 million award to really supercharge our efforts in urban and community forestry. And that'll be money rolling out over the next 5 years to help our residents. And we think it's going to be transformative in some neighborhoods in Phoenix where the shade coverage today is 1 or 2%.
Right.
That's really, really, really low. No public health guidelines would recommend that sort of shade coverage.
Yeah. And I've read some success stories over in Los Angeles where they deal with the heat issue as well, where again, they've been able to go in and tree up places. They've used the elastomers on basketball courts, and because asphalt absorbs heat, but any kind of covering, whether it's white or another color, will tend to make that cooler. And there's stories out there where neighborhoods around these parks have revived and are using them again during the daytime hours because they're bearable, they're doable. That's kind of what you're looking for?
That is what we're looking for, and that's the type of success that we think the community is looking for, and we think when the mayor and city council made the move to create the office, I think that's what they envisioned. That this team that's focused on heat day in and day out can bring more of those successes more quickly to more neighborhoods in Phoenix. And we just celebrated some tree planting with the American Rescue Plan Act funding. More plantings are happening right there. And yeah, it's that story that I love the way you described that. The people who are back out in the neighborhood, back out enjoying each other's company in outdoor spaces, walking the streets, maybe walking to use public transportation. I think that's the vision of success, in addition, of course, to keeping people alive and out of the hospital.
Yeah, that's for sure. So as you go forward, and from what I know about you, you have a huge heart, and you really care about this, and you care about people. And would the best thing ever is if we started to see this death rate on heat go down? Would that be the best thing ever for you?
That I'll say that's what the community has said they are looking for. When we've had the chance to convene a lot of stakeholders over the past decade with the state health department, county health department, and we've asked that community, what will the indicators of success be? And I think in part because our region has had such a strong history in heat health surveillance, it's on people's minds. But the number one indicator for success has been see those numbers come down. I think there are a lot of other types of successes as well. I think hearing the stories you talked about that my kids are out playing in the yard this evening and enjoying the shade and the lower temperatures here on a May or June evening. I think those successes are out there as well. It really sticks in my mind from a neighborhood meeting 6 or 7 years ago. A gentleman was just extremely frustrated that he couldn't get home from the grocery store. He was a bicyclist, couldn't get home without his ice cream melting. Oh. Now, I don't know if we can change that story, because ice cream is tough when it's 100 degrees, but it's those day-to-day interactions that I think when they're all a little bit better, we'll have a much higher quality of life, city and region-wide.
And so, leaving on an optimistic note, even if the city of Phoenix is going to get hotter, and we think that it is, we can still face these problems and make Phoenix more livable?
I think so, and let me just add to your point there about it getting hotter. I think when we talk about temperature in cities, so much of the conversation is dominated by one location. Yes, when we talk about the air temperature, we're talking about Sky Harbor Airport and its air temperature. And of course, on your broadcast and others, sometimes we look at more detailed at the map and get other locations. But what is not in the public discourse, and no finger pointing here by any means, I think we all have work to do. And in some ways, the air temperature is just a tiny part of the story of our daily lives. What I think about for the future is take your experience throughout the day. What temperatures are you experiencing? how often are you in the shade? How often are you in a comfortable indoor space? Let's think about you as a person, and if you're comfortable.
Yeah.
Let's think about the other 4-some million people who live in this region.
Yeah.
I think everybody's thermal experience, their thermal safety, can be much, much, much improved in the future, even if that one thermometer at Sky Harbor Airport says it's 116 more often than it did today. I don't think those two things have to be coupled. Shade is so important. Indoor environments are so important. And those don't really show up in the Sky Harbor Airport temperature data.
No, and I agree with that 100%. It's kind of like I have this discussion every year with all my meteorologists and climatologist friends. It's like, the temperature out in Peoria or in downtown Phoenix is different from Sky Harbor Airport right now. But, it's kind of like, well, that's what we're stuck with, and that's what everybody wants to do the headlines on. So I understand you. But you do remember I got that infrared camera, or that FLIR camera or whatever, and I pointed it at our back lot in the middle of summer, and it was 100 degrees at 10 o'clock. That asphalt was 100 degrees at 10 o'clock. I think it's also that kind of awareness, understanding that heat sticks around for a while, will also help people adjust to it, don't you?
Let's make more precise measurements of the places we care about and are spending time. Let's talk about more than just air temperature. Let's talk about the temperature of surfaces. Yeah. When we're in community meetings, people really talk a lot about walking in bare feet. When they lived here in the past, a generation ago, it seems that there always seem to be these stories about playing in our bare feet in the streets or in the front yards. Well, as you just mentioned, those surfaces are dangerously hot right now. So let's talk about the surfaces. Let's talk about the heat that we're feeling from the sun or not when we're in the shade, so we can understand the actual environmental conditions that are impacting people, which again aren't as well represented by just one thermometer at one place. Yeah.
So as we get into 2024, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to you regularly about how the heat mitigation is going in Phoenix, but what are the one or two things that you'd like to see your office and the city be doing?
Yeah, I think I'll talk a couple of things about that we're doing, and then invite the listeners and viewers to engage. We're in the midst right now of updating the city's tree and shade master plan. Hasn't been touched since 2010. It's a really high focal point for community members, and it's a shame it hasn't received attention since that time. So we're working on that to set a new trajectory for the city, to accelerate our investments on our strategy around trees and shade that would come from engineered structures. And we're also updating our heat response plan, the strategy that shapes our summer efforts. And we're excited to see the state moving to develop its first wide state heat preparedness plan that will be in effect next summer as a consequence of the governor's declaration and executive order in August. So we're excited to be moving forward on those planning efforts. Of course, we continue to hunt ruthlessly for additional resources to support all of these programs. But if I also might make an invitation to the listeners and viewers, ways to get engaged. We've got 3 grant programs open right now that community members in qualifying neighborhoods can apply to. There's a grant program that is for trees at people's yards and in their neighborhoods. That one's called Community Canopy.
Okay.
Got another one for schools and youth centers called Canopy for Kids. And if trees aren't for you, but maybe an engineered shade structure is, and you're familiar with a school or a youth center, maybe we need to get a shade structure over that playground. Our Shade for Students program might be right for you. Phoenix.gov/heat to learn about those programs. We are eager to get money out the door to help listeners and viewers. So please visit our website, and we've got a team that's ready, willing, and able to help prepare competitive applications to those grant programs. And for folks who want to join our heat response efforts, phoenix.gov/volunteer. We have a number of ways folks can get involved. Join us on streets, helping share information about those community cooling resources. Maybe join us at a trailhead, provide some heat safety messaging for people undertaking some physical activity on our summer days. And we expect there will be some other opportunities to help with heat response next summer as well. So phoenix.gov/heat and phoenix.gov/volunteer, good ways to get engaged.
That sounds great. Dave Hondula has been our guest. He's the director of heat response and mitigation. We just call him the Phoenix Heat Guru. David, thanks for coming by and sort of talking about some of this stuff. Hope we can do it regularly, because I do think, and you're one of the people who's convinced me over the years, it's a huge issue. It's one we've got to tackle, and it's one we got to fix.
And it's one we can tackle together, and the role of our media partners is so important. Public education, awareness, and the invitation to participate. I think you've got you've got some of the best connections with the community out there, and institutions like local government are not well served if we're not working hand in hand with you all. So thank you for the invitation to chat today.
You got it.
This is Beyond the Green Screen, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.